Nam by Mark Baker. The Vietnam War in the words of the soldiers who fought there. Narrated by Charles K. Vitale. My guy dies. It's no big gig to me. I tag him, book him, and bag him. Doc thought to himself. I see too much of this shit. I can't lose sleep over him. I just can't. Doc wasn't a real doctor. The GIs in Vietnam called every corps man Doc, except in battle when they shrieked, "Medic!" as they fell. He looked again at the letter from the parents of the kid who had been in his unit. "Dear Doctor," they wrote, "our son often mentioned you in his letter home and the wonderful things you did for his guys and his company. If you can, please tell us how our boy died." Their son had been sent home in a closed casket. "Oh God," Doc sighed. "How am I going to answer this letter? I'm not going to say he had cold beans and motherfuckers for breakfast. Took some shots from the other guys about being a cherry. Then went out and got blown to 50 million pieces, which is exactly what happened. On a routine patrol with his platoon, the boy triggered a landmine rated afterwards at 150 pounds of explosives. The resulting crater was the size of an average bathroom in a suburban home. Both of his legs and one arm were torn off. One side of his skull was destroyed. 6 other men were killed with him. It was a common way to die in Vietnam. Thousands of closed caskets were delivered to quiet graves all over America during the country's involvement in the war in Southeast Asia. They remained virtually undisturbed, forgotten for 10 years and more. Recently, journalists and filmmakers, generals, diplomats, politicians have decided to tell Americans how and why that boy died. Much of their tale is concentrated on the silence of the closed casket. As the story unfolds, it either ignores the humanity and individuality of the boy inside the box, relegating him to the cold storage of statistics, history, and politics, or it capitalizes on the misery of the coffin's contents, elevating the blood and bones to a mythical realm of heroism or evil or rock and roll madness. Something is missing from their story. Something personal, something palpable. They treat the war as though it were a vague event from the distant past, beyond living memory. No one has bothered to talk to the men and women who went to Vietnam and fought the war. What happened in Vietnam? What did it look like? How did it smell? What happened to you? Vietnam veterans know firsthand the statistics, the heroism, the evil, and the madness. They are the ones qualified to look inside the casket, identify the body for what it is. A dead boy killed in a war, who had a name, a personality, and a story all his own. Some of the people who waged the war will tell you through the pages of this book what happened to him. Until now, most of them have been as silent about their experiences and as invisible to society as their dead brothers. They are wary of strangers. Questions make them cautious. The bullshit antennae are always out, as one veteran put it. Starting with a handful of contacts, I made my way from interview to interview on a verbal passport of personal recommendations. "Yeah, he's okay, meet him, and see if you want to talk." They wanted to know what I was doing while they were in Vietnam. I told them I was a college student involved peripherally with the anti-war protests. I joined the demonstrations when my idealism moved me, if it was convenient. Although my emotions ran high and my convictions were real enough, I had no intention of letting dictation to the movement interfere with my nice, privileged draft deferment. I figured I was typical of a majority of college students at the time. I find it much more gratifying to recall the war stories of the peace movement and the vanished warmth of tribal communion, but I've sorted out the reality of peer pressure and personal motives as well. When they asked why I wanted to write this book, I first answered practically, honestly, for the money. I make my living as a writer. But I explained that my interest wasn't entirely mercenary. The project began for me back in 1972. By chance, I became good friends with a Vietnam veteran that year. We shared an apartment, meals, and a lot of whiskey. Brian told me about his experience in the war. In the course of those conversations, I discovered things about Brian, about myself, that I hadn't known before. His having a chance to talk about his experience and my willingness to listen strengthened our relationship. His stories revealed more about the place, the war, and the people involved in it than anything else I've read or seen on television concerning Vietnam. It was apparent that the whole story hadn't been really told. I couldn't tell it myself, but I sure as hell wanted to hear it. I told the veterans I had no intention of forging a political document honed on guilt and condemnation, nor was I interested in glorifying war and the soldiers' lot. I just wanted to record what they could remember about the intersection of their lives with the Vietnam War and the consequences of that experience. Approached with candor and respect, some of them told me nothing, backing out at the last minute from one appointment after another. But most of the men and women I met held the light with a sense of both duty and the relief as I examined a dark corner of their lives. They seemed to feel obliged to relate their stories clearly, accurately for the sake of dead friends, dying ideals, and a personal sense of worth and honesty. Once I was trusted, the words rushed out like prisoners released from a solitary confinement. For a few, there was a relief in draining some of the poison that had festered around a wound. These people are not extraordinary, except in the fact that they survived the Vietnam War and continue to survive. On more than one occasion, I was specifically asked by the man I was interviewing to mention the fact that he had a good job and was earning a decent living. At night, he goes home to his wife and children, sometimes stopping for a few beers at a local bar. In his spare time, he is watching baseball on television or polishing his car, not climbing a bell tower, automatic weapon in hand, to take pot shots at innocent civilians. However, I also talked with individuals who know where the impulse to climb that tower comes from. I met people who can't seem to settle in one place, who have failed at loving others, who are choking on their bitterness, who have attempted to commit suicide. Physically and mentally scarred, their lives have been permanently damaged by their experience in Vietnam. That doesn't make them abnormal, only as fragile as other human beings. Because of the personal equation, these accounts are commonly called war stories. It must be assumed that included here are generalizations, exaggerations, braggadocio, and very likely outright lies. But if these stories were told within a religious framework, telling them would be called bearing witness. The human imperfections simply authenticate the sincerity of the whole. The apocryphal aspects have more to do with metaphor than with deceit. In many ways, these stories from Vietnam are as old as war itself. What you will read here has more in common with Homer's classic realism in recounting the graphic details of the carnage at Troy than with Vic Morrow swaggering through an episode of combat. We didn't see it all on television. The Technicolor blotch of napalm flickering on the screen while Walter recited the day's body count like a grim blessing over our suppers had little to do with gagging on the stench of burning man. We sanitized war with romantic adventure and paranoid propaganda to make it tasteful enough for us to live with, because Vietnam veterans lived through it. The account they gave is as raw and shocking as the open wound. Death and brutality pervade this book, like the heavy ticking of a clock echoing through the entire house on a sleepless night. But the soul's pain is the nightmare that keeps the household awake. The gory mechanics of death remind us for the 10,000th time that war is hell, as it has always been. But the blood and guts is only the extraordinary setting within which ordinary men and women played out their very lives. War poses all the hard philosophical questions about life and death and morality and demands immediate answers. The abstractions of scholarly debate become the very concrete matters of survival. In one short year, Vietnam took the measure of a man and of the culture that put him there. War strips away the thin veneer applied slapdash by the institutions of society and shows man for exactly what he is. We must listen closely to the men and women who became both the victims and the perpetrators of the war, if we want to learn something real about this particular conflict, something real about the human spirit, something real about ourselves. Nam, that piece of a word, signifies more than just one of many wars the United States has fought in its 200-year history. Vietnam was more than ideologies and armies. The war and its culture ramifications provided the ritual passage to adulthood for a generation of Americans, my generation. It was a time when millions of us made the choices that would set the patterns of our lives. If we are to understand ourselves, it is necessary to know more intimately the event that propelled us onto our present course. Until we deal more honestly and thoroughly with the Vietnam War and the veterans of that war, we can't expect to make much progress as individuals or as a nation. This book is not the truth about Vietnam. Everyone holds a piece to that puzzle. But these war stories, filled with emotion and stripped of ambition and romance, may bring us closer to the truth than we have come so far.